Bang! Neeves Knives. I'm Jared. My lovely wife Kara is at work, and today we are doing a knife talk episode about locks, locking mechanisms, different locking mechanisms, and different variations of locking mechanisms. And I have a whole bunch of different ones laid out here. There are some that I do not have in my arsenal right now, but let's get into some of the ones I do have. Also, if you don't mind, if you want to support us, we do have a Patreon link down in the description. We do monthly giveaways to our patrons. Every single month we give away a knife to one of our awesome patron members. So if you want to check that out, the link is in the description. We also do regular giveaways on the channel when we hit mile markers. And we also do live videos every Wednesday and Saturday at 7:30 p.m. Central Time. So if you want to hang out with us during a live, come on through. All right, let's get into this. So, the first lock we're going to talk about is a steel frame lock. It's just a regular frame lock knife where they take one side of the scale, make a cutout, bend the lock over so that it moves underneath the tang of the blade when it gets past it. So when it gets past, the lock bar moves over and locks in place. Very simple lock. Very strong lock though. Now here's another variation of that. It's where they take the steel, because they use maybe a different handle material like this one. And this knife is the CARHARTT bare knuckle. They took aluminum scales and then screwed a steel lock bar into the aluminum scales. You can see the screws down at the bottom. And then the lock bar acts the same way as a frame lock. It is called a sub frame lock. This first knife I showed is the Ganzo FH12. Next up, this would be a titanium frame lock. So the entire frame is made of titanium. I have a lot of different versions of these, but this one, however, has a steel insert because titanium is a very strong material. It's stronger than steel, but lighter than steel. I think pound for pound it's stronger. So it's lighter and stronger than steel, yet it's not as hard as steel. So unless if it's cut right, it's sometimes easier for companies to put just a steel insert in. That is that little piece you see right there. That's what that screw holds in. And it locks up on the tang. So that way it makes steel on steel. It can prevent lock stick, lock slip, and prevent the lock from over traveling after many, many deployments. Now, without the steel insert, here is a titanium frame lock without the steel insert. Now, a way to make it work, because it's a softer material, they will carbonize the lock face, and then the lock geometry has everything to do with it. So if you see the taper of the tang, which is right here underneath my finger, right there in front, that's a taper. Now that is going to lock up right here. It's the same spot right there. Now the lock face is normally flat across, not always, but usually it's flat across, and then coupled with the taper of the tang of the blade will prevent it from over traveling. It will prevent lock stick, and especially if they carbonize the lock face of the titanium to make it harder. Next up, a titanium liner lock. So this is a titanium liner lock. Now these come with or without a steel insert, kind of like how you've seen on the titanium frame lock. I do not have a titanium liner lock as of right now, or at least I couldn't think of one that I do have. So this one does not have a steel insert, but it does not have any lock stick. It locks up very strong, so you know the blade or the lock geometry is done very well. So it's a liner lock, which this is a liner. To where they basically, it's kind of like the Framelock, except for the liner is right here. This is the liner. And then they make a cutout that bends over as the lock. And this is made out of titanium. We will show another liner lock made out of steel here in just a moment. Or you know what? Let's just do it right now. Here is the same thing, but this one's done out of steel. And I haven't been naming the names. I'm sorry, I should be. This is the Ferrum Forge Stinger. It's a newer knife from Ferrum Forge. So you see how it locks up to the tang of the blade, and this is steel on steel. So the liner's steel and the blade is steel, making a great strong lockup. This was the Drop Terzola. This was the Tashi Barucha Prism. And this is the Skiff Drifter. Now, let's get to the next one. Okay, so we showed the titanium frame lock. That's the same thing that this is with the steel lock bar insert. I don't know why I have it sitting here because it's the same thing. But what we will talk about is a bolster lock. So this is just another variation of a frame lock. So the same thing that this was and this was, or this, but except for this one's titanium right here, and this one's titanium. So this is basically the same as this one, just with it just acting as a bolster lock. So a bolster lock is where they cover the front of it with a material. In this instance, it is micarta. Beautiful micarta. And then the frame lock is underneath, as you can see, the material. So it's the same thing as this, but with material over the face of it. This one does not have a steel insert. It is just a titanium frame lock and done very, very well. Now, knives don't need to have a steel lock bar insert as long as they are done right. However, it can be more difficult for companies to get right. Next up, this is a titanium frame lock, except for this one has a different detent system. So this one is a detent nub. So it still has the steel lock bar insert, and you can see they literally made this entire section right here steel. So this is all titanium, and then this screw right here is holding in their big steel insert. It's a nice big one that also acts as the detent all in one. And the detent is what keeps the blade held in place from opening up in your pocket, and also helps create the resistance when using the flipper tab, thumb studs, or however you're deploying the knife. It holds the resistance, and after you put pressure and build up pressure, it shoots out after it breaks the detent. Okay, so now this one's a titanium frame lock too, but this one's a little different. Sorry, this I keep forgetting the names to say it. This is the Sharp by Designs Micro Typhoon. This one is the Cody. It's called the Duckling, but it's the Cody Usler Duckling. Okay, so now this one, this is the Wee Snex, and this one has a steel, it's kind of like a steel tube or a steel bar. You see the circle? Now that goes all the way through and also acts as the detent and the lock face. So instead of being it's like a steel insert, except for it's like a steel bar or steel tube, whatever, however you want. I guess it's not a tube because it's not hollow. It's a solid bar, a little tiny bar that acts as the lock face. So that is on top of this, inserted in there, and then also comes out the other end and acts as the detent also, which makes a very strong, reliable lockup without lock stick, lock over travel, and also makes very good action. Next up, the old back lock. So now the old back lock is where when you start opening it, you see this going down. It pulls down because it's putting pressure up here on this. This is basically the lock. So it's going to put pressure on it. You see it lifting up, and then it's going to fall down into this groove right there. It's going to fall down into that groove. You're going to see it snap right there. Bam, snapped in. It's a very strong lockup. There are different versions of this, like the triad lock, which I don't have one here, but the triad lock is basically the same thing, but they add in a stop pin, which actually makes it far more stronger. And it also only gets stronger through time because it's putting pressure in between the tang and the stop pin with the lock. So you get the resistance from the strap. After you break that resistance, it's going around the circle of the tang, sliding, 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 and then now it's about to drop in. So this has a notch out right here, and then the notch out falls down in there. That's also the same thing that this one is, except for this one can be used more one-handed. Forgot to say, this is the Mustang by QSP. This one has a very, very smooth lock for a back lock. Usually they're not as smooth as that one. This is the Spider Cordelica, a one-handed back lock, because you can push the back lock, which disengages it, push it forward, then this part right here hits your finger, and then you can turn it and close it. But you'll see the tang of the blade coming around in a circle. You see the notch. It's going to fall down into that groove you see right there if it would stop being blurry. Right there, and snap. Very strong, very reliable, very strong, and very simple. Okay, so next up, let's go to the access lock. Okay, the access lock. Now, there's different variations of this too. So an access lock is this bar right here. So you see this bar going across the back of it. Now, that's going to act as the detent. See how I just pulled it and it broke the detent? So it's basically acting as a detent, even though it's not a real detent. And it's pushing it down. So it pushes it down. You see it push down. Now it's going to roll on the round part of the blade or of the tang. It's going to go around until it hits this flat. This flat part is right here. Sorry. Okay, so you see the flat part right there. So it's going to come up and around, and then it's going to go up that flat part. Bang. Now it went right up behind us. So now the only way this is going to close is if it breaks this bar. There's two Omega springs, one on this side and one on this side, that's making this go up and down right there. Okay, you can actually see them kind of right there, that little coil right there. That's the Omega spring. I actually think I might have one. This is basically what an Omega spring looks like. There's different thicknesses, but it gives you tension, and this part is wrapped around this part right there. Then it creates tension and pushes it back up. So then the bar goes up behind the blade, and now, like I said, in order to break the lock and be slammed forward, it would have to shear this bar, which if you know anything about strength, like say, if you take this pen right now, right, I could break it easily when it's this long, right? But now if I cut just a little piece out of this thing this big, it'd be very hard for me to break that little piece. Well, same thing with this pen. Or it has to break through these steel liners, which makes this thing incredibly strong. Incredibly strong. It also gives very smooth, fun action. It's one-handed. I don't have to put my fingers in front of the blade to close it. So, and it's very smooth and very easy to use left or right-handed. So it's ambidextrous. Okay, so now another version of that would be like this. The Mannix. Oh, this is the Hogue Ritter RSK K1. So, this one is basically the same way, except for instead of using the Omega springs like I showed you, instead of using these, it uses an actual spring that you can see right there. So that, it's a bar right here that goes up into the blade right there. You can see it. There's the tang of the blade. It goes up behind it. And it's a bar with a little bar that goes into the spring. You can see how it's in the spring right there, and it acts basically the same way. That is the Spyderco Mannix Extra Large. Now, here is the Spyderco Shaman, which is a compression lock, which is kind of like a liner lock, but far stronger. And the reason why is because it uses the stop pin. So you see the liner right here. It's kind of like a liner like here on the QSP Penguin. It's kind of like a liner like this, except for, you see the stop pin right here, a gigantic, nice big stop pin right here, this circle right there, that's the stop pin. It's going to wedge itself right here on the tang of the blade, in between the stop pin and that. As soon as it stops being blurry, you're going to see it go over. So now it's in between the tang of the blade and the stop pin. And it also, this part right here is held up against the stop pin. So it wedges itself in between the stop pin and the tang, and then also this part of the tang is hitting the same stop pin, which makes it very, very strong. And also this has nice action that keeps your fingers out of the path of the blade, and you just have to hit the tab and swing a little bit, or if it's really smooth, it will just fall. Also, then there is the button lock. Now the button lock is a plunge right here that is in a spring. So there's a little spring on the inside right here pushing this way. And you're going to see it pop back. So right now it's acting as the detent for me to push it out. And then when it's going to lock up, you're going to see it lock up right into this little groove right there. Then it pops out. So now the spring is pushing that part out. Now when I push it, I'm pushing against the spring to move it. And then it swings shut. Now, these, kind of like an access lock or the compression lock, they should get stronger in time because it's a spring pushing the lock over. All locks are kind of like a spring being pushed, whether it's a frame lock like on this Gareth Bull Shamwari Wee knife. How this is kind of like the spring. Other ones actually have a real spring, like the button lock, that push the plunge over. Now, if the geometry of the space is cut out right, where the lock goes into, it just continuously keeps putting pressure, locking it up stronger and stronger. And just like with the compression lock, the same way, the liner's constantly putting pressure in between the stop pin and the tang of the blade to make it stronger. Now, this is a button lock that's a manual, so it's just a manual knife. It's not automatic at all. Now, this is kind of the same thought process, except for this one's on a spring, so this is an automatic. This is the Medford Smooth Criminal, and this is a excuse me. And this is a Microtech SOCOM Mini, the Mini SOCOM. So this is an automatic. So this has a spring that swings the blade out. So when I push the button, and I'm basically doing the same thing here, pushing it out of the way, now the spring takes over and swings it out. So when I push the button, it releases the lock, and then the spring takes over and opens it up. So that's what's happening here, except for you can't see it, but that's what's happening on the inside. And then the lock locks up. Let's see if we can see it down in there. So when it opens up, it hits this stop pin. Dang it, it's so blurry. It hits the stop pin. It's got a nice big stop pin. And then the button, or the right here, is on a spring, and it pushes out and locks up in between there, kind of like the button lock over here from the Medford. Okay, now let's get to another one that's very interesting. This is called this was made by G&G Hawk. This is a Buck Marksman, and the locking mechanism is made by G&G Hawk Designs, and it is called the Strong Locking System. So it acts as a detent and the lock all in one. So it's the strap that can also be moved. So there's a hole right here that a little Allen can go into, a little Allen key that they send with it. And if you unscrew it, or if you screw it, you move this little thing right here back and forth. Okay, so but that just pulls this thing down or up, which this, you see how it just broke the that's considered the detent on this one. So that's what's stopping it from opening. And then I push this, it breaks it. Okay, and then when it comes around, this part right here is going to lock up right behind it to make it nice and locked up. This also stops it from having blade play and up and down, because when it's disengaged, it is a free swinger. So this is a very smooth knife. But you can make it stronger and stronger. You can technically turn this to the point where this pulls down and it will not unlock. The pressure is just too strong pulling it down, or you won't even be able to open it. So you want to put it right at the right area to have the best action for you. Now, there are far more locks, like just like how we were talking about the bolster lock here. I also have a bolster lock here. This one's in micarta. This one's in carbon fiber. There are the liner locks like this with the titanium inserts, kind of like the same thing like the Framelock, like right here, where it has the lock bar insert, except for it's on a liner lock. There are triad locks. There are even more locks than I have here, but this gives you a good idea of different variations and different locks, and a lot of these are very common. I love you guys. Peace.